We'll get started. I'll just turn the screen towards myself for the folks online, and we'll go through a process of introducing ourselves briefly. And there's really 3 agenda items tonight. And I'll welcome everyone. I'm Wayne Caldwell, and you've probably seen me online. I hope you have at this stage of the course, or else we all have some catch up to do. So this is the second year that this course has been taught. We did it last year where we did something similar, bringing people together on 3 occasions, as we're proposing this year as well. Not everyone could make it every night, but I think people found it to be very effective and a helpful way of connecting with each other and feeling that you're more than simply a person online. So I think that hopefully we'll find it to be that way as well. So tonight what I'd like to do, and we won't take the full amount of time that's been suggested. I think we'll see how long it takes, but I don't think we'll go as long at all as what I've suggested. But anyway, I want to provide the opportunity for folks to ask any questions about the course outline, about evaluation, about anything along that line. Also to provide an opportunity to reflect on your first assignment, which was due. I had hoped to have had a chance to read them and to be able to provide a grade by tonight. That hasn't happened, but I'll make sure that happens promptly. And then also just any questions and initial reflections on assignment 2. So anyone have any questions before I ask you to start introducing yourself? Anything, any questions around the agenda? Okay, so what I'd like to do, and it's not to go into a long, lengthy, introduction of yourself, but rather to say who you are, what you're from, not where you're from. It's been a long day. The program that you're in, perhaps your home, those kinds of things, just that people might be interested in hearing about. So perhaps we'll go around the room to do that. And should I start on this side or that side?
Surprise us.
Surprise. Okay, we'll start with Britt, because that's fine.
Hi, I'm Britt, and I'm first year RPD, the Planning Master's Program. I'm from Goderich, and that's about 2 hours from here. Drove in today. And
yeah, thanks for doing that. Driving in as opposed to
yeah.
Right answer.
I had a buddy just today.
Yeah, that's good. And the weather's good too.
Yeah, we're January. I'm Laura, so I work for Huron County as a planner. I'm in the M-Plan program, and I live outside of Goderich, about a half-hour north. So I drove in for today, which is nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Allie. I'm a first-year Master of Public Health student. And I am from a small town called Nestleton, which is about, I guess, 2 hours east of here as well. But I didn't drive in today. Was already here,
So Nestleton is the other side of Oshawa and so on and so forth?
Yeah, like Port Perry.
Okay.
15 minutes east of Port Perry.
Okay. Well, I've got nieces and nephews from Port Perry. My sister lived in Port Perry for quite some time, so it's kind of cool. I'll just confirm that folks online can hear us okay, by the way. Anna, do you want to say, can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great, thanks. Vanessa?
My name is Vanessa. I'm a first year master's student in the Rural Planning and Development Program, and I've lived in a bunch of places, so it's really hard to say where I'm from, but for today I'll say I'm from the Orangeville area, and I live in Guelph currently, so I did not have to drive like 2 hours to get here. I took the bus.
And we'll go to folks in the back there.
I'm Jill. I'm part of the MPH program. I'm from Sarnia originally as well, and just excited to be here with everybody and just doing a new, very different from like traditional public health course.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Victoria, and where I'm from is a bit confusing, but anyway, I'm originally from Ghana, and then I migrated from England to here, but now Guelph is my home. What else was it?
What program are you doing?
Oh, sorry, the program I'm doing. I'm a first year RPD student. And I'm excited.
Thank you. Lena?
I'm Lana. I'm in the Rural Planning and Development Program, my first year. And I'm from Drumbo, which is outside of Woodstock, and it's around like 45 minutes from here.
Thank you.
I'm Rachel. I'm first year RPD, and I'm from half an hour down the road in Flamborough.
So, thank you.
I'm Brady. I'm from Perth, Ontario, the town of Perth, down between Kingston and Ottawa. I'm first year RPD student, and I'm excited to be in the course and get to meet a few public health students on the big screen.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom.
I'm Violetta. I'm first year MPH student, and I'm from Toronto.
I'm Shannon. I'm also first year MPH, and I am also from Toronto, so definitely not a small town or a rural community, but interesting to learn about those.
Hopefully the lessons are valuable.
My name is Justice. I'm also an MPH student, and I'm from Richmond Hill area.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Violetta.
Violetta?
Violetta.
Violetta.
I get it mixed up sometimes. Don't worry.
Good stuff. Well, thank you again, everyone. And just to start out with things for everyone, any questions with the course outline so far? I had meant to get back in time. I was in Toronto today. And I've actually discovered the train works really well, so I'm getting smarter as I get older.
The GO train or the subway?
The GO train.
Okay.
To
There's
get
a
in and out from Toronto, so avoided the traffic. But I thought I'd have time to read over the course outline, but I didn't. So if you ask questions, I've got a copy printed off. We can go to it. But any questions on the course outline, because this is a chance for some direct feedback, whether the instructions are clear, whether there's anything that you need any assistance with from that perspective. And I forgot to have the people online introduce themselves, so I'll have a question and then we'll ask them to do that.
Just in terms of the second assignment, it doesn't have to be a rural community, right? It can
No.
be
It could be elsewhere, that's right. So if everyone heard that, does it have to be a rural community? And no, not necessarily. For most people, it's likely to be, but it doesn't have to be. So would people online like to introduce themselves? Maybe I'll just call out names. I see, Jordan, you've unmuted yourself, I think. We can see that much.
Yeah. Hey, I'm back. Yeah, so my name's Jordan. I'm in Capacity Development and Extension in the second year of that program. And I'm from and currently living in O'Leary, PEI.
I actually will have people introduce their programs just a little bit, not everyone. But so do you want to tell us a little bit more about CDE for people that aren't familiar with the program, Jordan?
That's great for me because I, follow the program just to a T, by just throwing myself anywhere. But so yeah, Capacity Development Extension. I think all of us in the program, we were actually meeting last week, kind of discussing like, what is this program anyway? Like we're in the second year, like what is this to us? So I think we all take away from it different things. But for me, I'm interested in community building and the way that organizations can build those skills and talents to achieve their goals.
And I'm just going to turn my volume up here a little bit too, because I'm realizing, there we go. So that's great. Anybody have any questions about the CDE program? I think we have maybe one other person in the CDE program that might not be with us tonight, but
okay. I think there was one person listed in the discussion board.
Right, that's right. So Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself? Just mention, Hannah, there's in the bottom left of your screen, there's probably an audio button that you need to click on.
Does this work better?
That's perfect.
Okay, I also have my phone going, so that might be where the sound's coming from. Hi everyone, I'm Hannah, also in the Rural Planning and Development Program. I'm originally from Dufferin County, and that's where I am right now. And I also work in Stratford, so I split my time in between those two places right now.
That's great, thank you for that. And I see Silva. I'm just looking at the names I'm seeing on the screen. Silva, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure, can you hear me?
We can.
So hi everybody, I see some familiar faces, so hi. My name is Silva Youssef. I'm at the M-Plan program. I live in Alliston and I work in Collingwood. I'm currently working with a developer in planning department.
Great. Thank you for that. And Laura?
Hello, I'm Laura Biancline. I split my time between Dutton, Ontario and Terracotta. One's an hour east of Guelph, the other's 2 hours west of Guelph, and I'm in the Rural Planning and Development Program.
That's great. Thank you, Laura. And I'm seeing it says Simran, and that looks like a familiar something, but I'm not sure who it is. So
Hi. Sorry, I'm just trying to make my video work. There we go. Hi, I'm Simran. I'm in my first year of the MPH program. I live in Mississauga and I usually drive down on other days for my courses, but I thought I'd call in today.
That's great. Glad that it worked for you. I will ask, does somebody from MPH want to give a 30-second overview of what the program's about for people that might not be familiar with it? Anyone want to volunteer or be nominated? But maybe we could ask one of the planning students to describe the MPH. No, that wouldn't be right. So somebody want to just tell us what MPH is, how long the program is, the kinds of things that you do?
I guess I can. It's
you could feel the tension in the room here. People were, I don't know if I'll do that. But please, thank you.
Yeah, so it's a 16-month program. We learn a lot about health policy, how to develop different programs, health communications, health promotion, that kind of stuff. I'm just naming the courses that we take, but a lot of stuff that you can use for working in a career in public health.
Excellent. Have you come into contact with planners much in your careers yet, or your studies? Does planning ever come up at all?
I haven't, but I find it interesting what the connection that I'm seeing in this course.
Yeah, because I've worked fairly closely at times with folks in public health around some of the things that we'll be doing in this course, such as active transportation, walkability, community design, and such like. And I find the public health units that I work with are increasingly engaged with planners and planning, and vice versa as well. So it's good to see that. So hopefully folks can learn from each other through this process. Someone want to do the same for planning?
Sure.
Thank you, Vanessa.
So we have a rural planning focus as opposed to urban planning, which I think people are a bit more familiar with, but essentially we're looking at the dynamics of small communities, looking at how planners plan a landscape, take in concepts of design, how we interact with people, bring people together, kind of similar to capacity extension. And then you can take a more municipal planning focus, which Wayne has an excellent background in. You can look at economics. It's a really diverse program. As we know, we are in a public health sphere, which is really cool. So this program does touch base with a lot of really applicable real life.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I had a question. Like, I know that throughout the course so far, we've been like defining rural communities as like differently. And I was just wondering, is it the same across the, like when you guys teach it, or does it depend on the context?
So there's a quote I like to use sometimes. I don't have it quite right, but it's, if you've been in one rural community, you've been in one rural community. And the implication of that is to say, of course, there's incredible variation from community to community, and they're all different, and they share some commonalities that we can talk about, but things like, distance is an issue in rural communities. Land use is different often in rural communities. Of course, you're dealing with a smaller population base relative to large urban centers as well. There's a bunch of other things that we could enter into as well. And again, just reflecting on, I think the three of you, all from urban contexts, and some of the folks in planning too. They're not necessarily from rural communities, but maybe from large urban centers originally as well. And I do like, and this is part of my promotional thing that I tell students, so some of you will have heard this, and I like to tell people a story of Kelsey. And Kelsey came to us to study in rural planning and development. She came from British Columbia. She studied farmland preservation with myself, and she got a job promptly. I was working with the township of Guelph, Hermosa, just on the edge of Guelph. And the next thing I know, I get an email from her that, and her husband, who was working with the Perimeter Institute at Waterloo, got a job, and they had to move, and they had moved to New York City. And Kelsey was now contacting me to tell me she was working with New York City Planning Department. So it's about taking those rural skills that people might have, and it's the context is different, but the skill set is very similar, whether you're in rural or urban. And the applications are different as well. So I like to tell that little story of Kelsey to convince people, or convey to them, convince isn't the right word, but convey to them that if they come to here into our program, it doesn't mean that forever and a day they shall be locked away from Goderich. Well, what a relief, eh?
Blissful existence.
So anyway, thanks everyone for your introductions and the comments. I'd like to, again, I'll just pose that question. Any questions of the course outline?
Not of course, I want the plan of the public health program. Are most people coming in like with medical backgrounds, or have you studied a public health? Are you working in the field? What's the?
Actually, a good number of students are like graduated from like biosciences.
Yeah,
from
we're all really young, surprisingly.
a lot of people are like went straight from undergrad to their masters. I did my undergrad in like psychology. It took like a year in between. But
So
a lot of them
mostly public health experience, like in terms of volunteering, not much medical background, I would say.
I've actually seen to that, so I've been separated
You're in a
from my
different year.
cohort a little bit. So what I've noticed in this cohort, it does seem like a lot of people are coming right out from their undergrads, but the group that I was with before I had to take the semester off, that changed my timetable a bit. Almost everybody was in their 30s. So it was quite different going between those, and I don't know if that's part of the recruitment process, it's changed, but I think it can be quite a wide variety of people that have varying levels of experience in the field. Thanks.
Any other, Victoria?
I have a question on focus on what community.
Sorry, can folks online hear? I always have to remind Victoria to speak a little louder.
I was struggling with the scope of community because in my mind, community meant the sharing of services, which can be a combination of areas. So I don't know what the focus of this course for what community is supposed to be.
It's a good question. I'm not sure if I have a really good answer for you. I mean, people will approach community with very different perspectives. There will be a community of professionals in public health. There's a community of planners. And of course, in this context, we're primarily talking about people living in a geographic area that we refer to as a community, right? It would be primarily the application, I think, that I would think of anyway. Any questions from anyone online just about the course outline, the assignments, things of that nature? Okay, if not, then what I'm going to do is ask us just to reflect a little bit on your first assignment, which I think everyone has completed based on the numbers that are in the Dropbox, so that's a good sign. And so we don't have time to go into lengthy discussions, but maybe it's to think about your community that you looked at and whether you concluded it was healthy or not healthy, with maybe one example, if that's something that people are willing to volunteer. And if you're not comfortable doing it, that's okay too. But maybe just somebody want to volunteer whether you thought your community was healthy or not. Brady?
Yeah, so I did my hometown of Perth, and as most people in the program know, I talk about Perth every chance I get, so it's pretty easy to do. For
it sort of balances Huron County, what can I say?
Yeah. So I concluded Perth was a healthy community. One of the reasons I guess thing I talked about in my paper was this community improvement plan that's funded by the town to improve the downtown core, basically to revitalize storefronts in the downtown area. Perth is known for as like a heritage community. It's like an old Scottish settlement, originally settled by Scottish. And it's all like stone buildings, beautiful downtown. But anyways, the community improvement plan is basically to invest more money. Community basically incentivizes businesses to work on their storefronts, and it basically improves the like how comfortable people are walking downtown. They've replaced a lot of lights and everything. So in my idea, it allowed for more people like to walk downtown and to basically support the local economy and everything. So I felt that the community fund was a way to really make the community healthier, just in appearance, but also like encouraging more people to get downtown and walk from store to store in downtown areas.
A couple of key themes I'm hearing is walkability and safety. I don't know if you used the word safety, but those key things. How many folks have been to Perth?
Yeah, it's worth the trip.
Anything else you want to say about Perth? Or any questions anyone has? Brady?
Yeah. One negative I said about Perth, or not negatives, no negatives about Perth, just joking. But I said one reason why I consider maybe an impact to the health community is the loss of a lot of large employers. Perth is was a manufacturing town, like a lot of towns in southern Ontario. And over the last 25 years, we've lost quite a few, large industrial factories. Just this last year, we lost, as a town of 6,000 people, we lost a factory that made car parts and it employed 300 people. So that was an impact to our local economy, which I said that's you know, if people don't have jobs, they're not making good money, and or loss of jobs that are well paying, that impacts the health of the community.
Just out of curiosity, how many folks in the room would say that you would consider your community, your home community, wherever that might be, to be an urban community? Right. So, and how many people would think of their community as rural or small town? Right? And what I find interesting is we think of the large urban centers in the province, particularly the GTA and area, growing at incredible rates, right? That's where most of the 4 million people moving to the province over the next 30 years will move to, are those large urban centers. We have just as many rural and small town areas in the province losing population. And I think we often forget that. So I don't know whether Perth has lost population in the past or it's kind of stable.
It's basically been the same for the last 20 years or 25 years.
Yeah.
6,000.
Okay, thanks for that, Brady. Someone and anyone online, if you want to jump in, feel don't be shy to do that.
I'll go if no one wants to.
Okay, Laura.
So I also did my hometown. It's Holland Landing. So it's in the town. It's a community in the town of East Gwillimbury, about 45 minutes north of Toronto. And I kind of approached it from growing up there and spending like the first part of my life there. I viewed it as healthy. There was not the competitive land prices and the stress as land as a resource that there is now. It was more of a community where people lived and worked, and now it's very much treated as a commuting town to Toronto or like other parts closer to Toronto. So I kind of explained that due to its shift over the couple, like particularly the last 10 years, it's become unhealthy because entire demographics, young families, single parents, recent immigrants have been completely shut out of the area because they can't afford to move there. The average house price is $750,000 for like a bungalow. So I looked at it from the shift that it's creating really uneven income distribution throughout the area, and it's pushing people further away from the existing communities that they grew up in. So yeah, so I said it's kind of more. It still has the physical components of a healthy community. There's still tons of green space, walking trails, a well-utilized library, community center. There's still that community resource, but there's such a limited access to live and get at those resources for only a very small select group of people who can afford to move there, that it's not as healthy as it was. So yeah, that was kind of the approach I took.
So make sure I capture that. So house prices are going up significantly?
Yes, and there's over 100% population increase projected over the next 30 to 40 years. Yeah. So just the density in general is becoming kind of not the character that it used to have, and it's increasing the number of services that's required as well.
Interesting. Sessions I was at today with the Greenbelt Council, there was a fair bit of talk and a presentation from someone from the Waterloo region who's reflecting on population projections. Population projections are really important in terms of determining and identifying growth rates, kind of housing, amount of housing, and so on and so forth. And his reflection was that a lot of the projections are based on trends that are really extrapolated from like the 70s, as opposed to the kinds of things that people are doing today as the baby boom generation starts to age, looking for very different kinds of housing than what traditionally was the case. So it's just throwing some of that stuff out of whack, which is interesting to observe. Okay, thanks. Any questions for Laura? Someone else?
Laura was telling me how many units were going in behind her parents' house.
Oh yeah, there's like 4,000 units going in. So it's like a 5-kilometer stretch of road that's just completely like from Highway 11 back that's been built up. And that's one of 5 in probably 10-minute drive from their place. So yeah, and that's been phased in over the last, I'd say, 8 years. Yeah. So yeah, it's very significant change in what it used to be. Like I would have said that now it's really just amalgamated part of the next town over, when it used to be kind of more of an independent, smaller community.
The changes that represents.
Yeah, and it does take away from some things, like there's a highway extension that contributed to traffic, because the traffic counts have like gone up in the entire area because of people getting off the highway and using the side roads. So it's created these spin-off effects.
Thank you for that. Someone else like to share their observation? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I did Oak Ridges, which is like a small community within the town of Richmond Hill, and it's where I grew up. So I kind of focused on the now because my family still lives there. And in terms of public health, we didn't have much background on kind of what the different aspects we were supposed to talk about were. So I went off that video that had like the 6 key like things to look for, kind of laid it off that, and then did some social determinants on top of that. So one thing that they just put in kind of was back and forth on healthy, unhealthy in terms of house prices, because they have gone up a lot as well. But they just opened a park, so there's a lake, which is kind of like the main area, and they opened like a pedestrian-only walkway around the lake, and then a huge park, a skateboard park, some beach volleyball courts, so like a huge kind of community project with a community center in it. So kind of just to develop healthy, keep those obesity rates down a little bit, and lots of trails and forested areas still.
Quite walkable then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions or anything else you'd like to mention? Okay, thank you. Someone else? Everybody gets a turn. Vanessa?
I did the town of Orangeville because I'm familiar with it, and I did look at like housing, which seems to be a very similar problem. The housing costs in Southern Ontario are going up. Orangeville's affected. But generally, I found an article that's talking about how Orangeville is like one of the 3 main towns within the county that have a really high median base income, which is quite interesting to look at. So generally, the people living in the community are generally well off. I looked at like the programs that are available to subsidize the cost of housing, the services provided for those who do have a low income. And I found overall Orangeville is a really healthy community, but one thing that I noticed that Orangeville seems like they're working on is their accessibility to services, specifically to seniors. It seems like there's a pretty large senior population in Orangeville, and so trying to provide the services for those individuals who aren't as vulnerable, that do need better access to healthcare. And then one of the interesting things, like one of the groups was providing really good access to like public health oriented things was at a conservation authority. So Island Lake Conservation Area is like right in Orangeville, and so there's an event every year called Seniors Day, and they like make the seniors they'll make the seniors they encourage the seniors to walk around the lake, and there's like local companies there that give like food and coffee, and they have little what do they call them? Milk carts to like provide support. So they're encouraging like active senior health. So it was really interesting looking at that kind of.
Orangeville, right?
Orangeville, yeah.
Yeah, and experiencing major growth phenomena
Yes.
as well.
And I got in a conversation with my aunt about like they're expanding a lot towards Caledon, and so the boundary issue there is interesting to look at. Didn't touch on that in this paper, but just with their expansion and stuff.
Yeah, because in time, in the past, I mean, Orangeville was thought of very much as a rural, small town type of community. It sure is, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's like it has that. It's not like it's Guelph. It's kind of like Guelph in the sense that it's like small town, but like, is it like it's starting to change?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you for that. I was distracted for a second, realizing I hadn't hit the record button. It's supposed to be recording automatically, so I'm hoping it's doing that for the benefits of the people that I said we would try to record if they weren't here. So that's happening. Does somebody online want to volunteer to go?
Share if anyone, that's cool.
Go ahead, Jordan. I think that sounds like your voice.
Sure. Yeah, so I did my community of O'Leary, PEI. Well, I live outside of O'Leary, but it's a population of around 800 people. Like the size of it is around 2 square kilometers. So I was looking at it, and I kind of in my paper I outlined how, from the outset it looks like it could be a healthy community. It has a hospital, a number of health services. It acts like sort of as a service center for about 3,500 people that live on the outskirts. But whenever I kind of use the census as like my main data set, because there's not a whole lot of research done on specifically O'Leary. But yeah, it was interesting to see how, about a third of the total incomes in the region come from government transfers. About a third of the population is considered low income, and that half of all the people in town rent their homes, and that a third of those people are actually in subsidized housing. So when I was looking at the kind of the social determinants of health, thinking about income and housing, and the work that people do, I concluded that it wasn't necessarily as healthy as perhaps as it looked from the outside.
It sounded like that was at least in part based on the low income and the unemployment issues?
Yes, and the type of work that's available. So it's a lot of manual type work in agriculture and fisheries. So I also just sort of inferred from that people have a higher chance of becoming injured from that perspective as well.
Did I capture correctly? It's O'Leary is the community?
Yes, yeah.
Any questions? Or anybody been to O'Leary? 800 people in PEI?
What side of the island is it on? The north or south? Or is it maybe
It's on the western side.
western side?
Yeah. It has the Canadian Potato Museum in it. Like the world's largest potato. It was on a stamp. It's very important, you know.
I don't know if you saw Laura's reaction here, if you were watching that, Jordan, when the reference to the Potato Museum was made. It sounded like that was a winner, eh?
Very memorable.
Yes. Very good. Very good.
Good. Cool. Thank you for that. Someone else?
I can go. Okay. I looked at my hometown of Goderich, which I sort of used the 6 items in the video to just as a sort of overview, and found that a lot of things about the town were quite healthy. Good village center, centrally located school, public green space, but their affordable housing and alternative transportation were lacking. As in there's no alternative transportation, and affordable housing, similar sort of, I want to say creep. I live on a residential street, and all of the houses that have been bought in the last year have been bought by people retiring from Toronto who are actually not living in them. So they're empty, except for a few weeks in the summer. And I know a lot of my friends, and I run a rental business as well. A lot of people are looking for affordable housing, and so there's all these empty houses. So I looked at that as a big problem in terms of access.
Not Airbnb, but
a little bit of Airbnb, yeah, and a little bit of residential.
okay. Atlanta's doing a project, another class looking at Airbnb and the impacts on Laura as an example.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the similarities with Perth as well in terms of Goderich over time having lost some fairly significant employers.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, lots of unemployment, or a lot of people driving quite far to work at the Bruce nuclear plant or commuting outside of the county to.
Yeah. So a typical house price in Goderich for people who might not be familiar?
Creeping towards $500,000, I would say. Yeah. Like a sort of single detached home. Yeah.
Which for people in that community would feel outlandish.
It's pretty shocking, yeah.
So it used to be, Huron County used to have an average of under 2.
Yeah.
They were just retorting on how it was under 200,000. Now it's like, I think countywide it's like in the 300s.
Oh.
So,
yeah.
Which, compared to Toronto. Like,
yeah, we're just talking
I
about Toronto. I'm just like, because when I moved to Guelph, like me and my partner were just like, we need to buy a house here, like immediately, because we're from Toronto, and like just looking at the prices, like skyrocket there. And I lived downtown when I was in undergrad, and then coming here, and even like on the outskirts, even like places like Hamilton as well and Dundas is just for us as well. It's
It creates, in the Huron context, it creates some really interesting anomalies, because I suspect if you go to Dungannon, which is a little community with absolutely, the main street is completely derelict, but it has a few nice homes in it. But I suspect the house prices there, can you hazard a guess?
Oh, they've been under 250.
Yeah, that's what I would think. They could probably pick up something after 200,000.
Yeah.
Jordan, what are the house prices in O'Leary?
Around 100,000. Somewhere in around there.
But there's also like the wage consideration too. There's so many more.
Yeah, the other part of my paper I looked at the sort of what a living wage in Huron County is. There's some research that was done, and you can barely afford. Mostly it's the transit, it's the access to employment, and like access to daycare as well. Like they looked at a family of 4, and it was $7. I think the living wage was like almost $18 an hour, which, considering housing prices like compared to Toronto, that's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Any questions? Someone else? To avoid this we could simply start going around the room. Why don't we do that?
Sure. Okay. So I looked at Fort Perry, and I considered it a healthy community. A couple of the points I'll just touch on briefly was the green space and public space. So there's Lake Scugog, that's right there. So right along the waterfront, they host a bunch of activities and stuff. And in my opinion, it's pretty walkable. It's all the downtown, like the downtown core, with all the shops and little restaurants and stuff. The other thing that I thought was interesting was I read a recent news article about it, that at Port Perry High School, they opened their first Indigenous student room. So it's considered a supportive space for Indigenous students to access throughout the day. So I thought that kind of highlighted looking at the Aboriginal status and factors of that.
My sense is that Port Perry, the downtown, is in pretty good shape.
Yeah, it's on the radio and stuff, you know, they advertise we're going to visit downtown Port Perry. But that's, I think downtown Port Perry is quite different than like downtown Toronto.
Right.
So it's a nice place to visit.
Yeah, but it's that contrast, isn't it, between the large communities and small communities.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Maybe Jill?
Sure. My project paper was on Montreal. I spent quite a bit of time living there during undergrad and during my master's as well. And I would consider it to be a mostly healthy city. They have put such a massive emphasis on green space with the mountain in the middle of the city, which was actually designed by the same landscape architect, if I'm using that correctly, as was Central Park. So they've made great use of a tremendous amount of green space within the city, and they've made a point of keeping that space there, but also integrating it into small parks. You really can't go more than 2 or 3 kilometers before you find a very large park within the city. There's about 30 of them interspersed through the city. So even though there's a lot of residential space that's incorporated into even the downtown area because it's a large student population, they put a lot of emphasis on green space and accessibility to those spaces. They have a transit system that I think puts Toronto to shame with their like 8 or 9 subway lines through a city that's really only 2 million people, and each of those lines is well connected and well thought out so that there are accessibility ramps, there are transit stops for connections at pretty well every spot. So aside from just the physical factors of the city, I was a little bit surprised, but not entirely surprised, by the food insecurity issue within the city. They identified that if a person's first language wasn't necessarily English or French, one of the national languages, that was a factor for being at risk. But I was kind of surprised by the student status one, because that isn't typically ranked as high for food insecurity, but that's most likely due to the fact that they have 8 universities throughout the city and host about 200,000 students every year. So there are a couple different issues that are affecting the community, but overall I would say that it's a healthy city.
One item that you spoke to that I focused on or thought of is that notion of that community focus with the park that you're referring to. The name of it again?
Mont Royal.
And I've been there once or twice, but just came away really impressed with the level of use that was going on and the focus that it created.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that. Victoria?
Well, I focus on golf, but I didn't know much about golf, so then I spent a lot of time trying to understand the health community from the perspective of behavior within the community. So I found out that majority of people in golf actually don't take the required quantity of fruits and vegetables, and we have issues with overweight in obesity, and then perceived life stress is actually pretty high. So then, for me, I was looking at, okay, so what are the institutions that are supposed to support public health in Guelph? I realized that we have pretty good public health institution connections, but somehow it wasn't translated into people's behavior towards health. So then, hoping that with the pictures, I'll be able to look more at what the physical conditions are.
So overall, did you conclude the?
Yeah, I concluded that from an individual perspective, to say that the community is not very healthy.
Okay.
But I felt that there was a need to look at a wider determinants.
I'm thinking that probably most people in the room are currently living in Guelph, I'm guessing. So do most people think of Guelph as healthy or unhealthy? Just out of curiosity.
I consider it like really healthy. Just being around here and just the green space, and so many people own dogs, and like walkability here is very high compared to places in Toronto.
Okay.
But I guess it also depends on where, someone else might have grown up and comparing their hometown to Guelph as well. So it might be just different based off of perspective.
Certainly, the walkability item, I agree with you from my perspective.
Okay.
Anyone else who lives in Guelph that wants to offer opinion, Vanessa?
I'd agree it's also pretty healthy, and we're part of the running community. So in Guelph is the running capital of Canada, so there are running trails everywhere, walking trails everywhere. I see walkers in the morning at like 6:30 a.m. I'd say Guelph needs to work on their transit. I don't think that's very accessible to a lot of people, and then the housing cost would be an issue. So connecting to your point, depending on what social determinants you're focusing on, like there's things Guelph needs to work on. Their active transportation, cycling. That's not great. We could go on a big rant about that, but they're working on it. I know they're trying to get plans in place to make that a bit better. So overall, I think Guelph's pretty good.
Great. Any final points?
Pardon?
Any final wrap up?
But then my biggest worry was that it seems to have all the right systems, but then why is it not translating to healthy behavior stuff? And that's the thing that I was more concerned about, because which I found shocking, because I thought this place is more less stressful than where I used to be. But to find that perceived life stress was a major concern for Guelph, that really kind of made me want to walk. Okay, so why is it that we have all these things in place, but then it's not translating to the people already there?
Thank you for those comments and getting us to think about those items for sure. Any questions for Victoria? Okay.
I would just say maybe it's like a capacity extension issue. Like maybe like the services are there, people don't know how to access them.
Yeah. My thought on that is like I think there's like a certain amount of infrastructure that's always been in place, but with the like community growth and then the housing prices that have gone up so much, like Guelph General Hospital has been identified as a like major concern for public health as a site that needs to be updated and is like vastly understaffed and doesn't have the capacity that the community needs. It was like identified as out of date about 20 years ago. So and before that we had, I think it was solved a couple of years ago, but before that new ambulance station that was opened within the South End, we had the worst ambulance first responder response time in Ontario. So I think you're right about it being like a capacity issue. Like the South End has developed so fast, there isn't really that much public transit that's connected through there. So, and not to mention the housing prices as well. People can have access to like green space all they want, but if they're really swamped with their mortgages, they're probably not going to be accessing that either. So that's my thought on it.
The only other thing that I've found out that I'm thinking I would want to go into is that they're saying people commute. I mean, most people who live in Guelph commute more by car to work. And then also it's longer commutes for them. So not by time, but by the distance they need to take to work. So then, yeah, we have walkability, but then is it walkability for work? And it's more of walkability to make park or to school, but not to work. So then we are not really helping people with the infrastructure we have to actually link them to be able to use it the way we want to get the outcomes.
Thank you very much. I will reflect on something Jill mentioned. It's got me thinking about something in the news about all the noise pollution that we have. And so when you mentioned ambulances, a year ago and a bit, I was in Tokyo for a few days. And in the 4 days that I was in the city of Tokyo, I heard one car horn honk and I heard one siren. And we have a condo in downtown Guelph, and the sirens feel to me like they're almost constant. So I think, like, if they can do it in a city of 38 million people, that their sirens aren't going all the time. Anyway, that's my pet peeve in life these days. So Lana.
So for my community analysis, I focused on Drumbo. Drumbo has around 1,000 people in the town. And I looked at the social determinants of health. I looked at health services, social exclusion, education, food insecurity, and housing. And my grade for the level of healthy that Drumbo is, I said it was satisfactory because it's healthy in some ways, but then it's not healthy in others. So, like, for example, health services, there is a pharmacy in the town and there is a paramedic service station. So there is a little access to, like, cold medication or, like, if you need an ambulance or something, but there isn't, like, a doctor or a dentist or anything like that. You have to leave town for that. And then I also talked about, like, food insecurity, but in a way that Drumbo is kind of like a food desert because there isn't, like, a grocery store or anything. There is, like, agricultural land, so they could set up, like, a market or something, but there really isn't access to food. You have to leave, so you have to get in your car and go either, like, 20 minutes to Woodstock or, like, 20 minutes on the highway to Kitchener. So it's not exactly ideal. And then for education, there's an elementary school in the town, and I know that there are, like, some rural communities that don't even have, like, an elementary school. So I said that was pretty good, but there's still room for improvement with a lot of things, like housing. I looked at if there's, like, affordable housing, and I was actually surprised that there is. There's, like, a housing application form that you can go through the county, and there's a few houses in Drumbo, like, a few units and stuff that you can have, like, access to. So, like, I thought that was really good, but again, there's, like, room for improvement, so it's satisfactory.
Fair enough. One of the things that you said got me thinking. I used to drive my wife nuts with this observation. So how many people have a background in geography? Few people do. And central place theory, right? And you'd have this sense that if I went to a Drumbo with a population of 1,000 people, I could predict what services I would find there. If I went to Perth with a population of 6,000 people, so we'd be driving along and I'd say, Deb, give us a road map and tell me what's the population of Perth, because if at 6,000, I would have expected to find a movie theater, as an example. At is there one?
No, there was one in Smith Falls,
Okay.
but it closed. It's 10,000.
But at a population of 1,000, historically, right, you would expect there to be a grocery store for sure. You would have expected there probably to be a doctor, right? A pharmacy, probably, certainly a bank. And now a community of 1,000 people might not have any of those services any longer. There's lots of communities of 1,000 that I'm aware of that have lost their grocery store, that don't any longer have a bank. It's just interesting to see this transition in the relatively recent past. From earlier in my career, I would have predicted what Drumbo would have services as an example. Okay, thank you for that. Rachel.
So I looked at Flamborough. Has anyone heard of Code Red in Hamilton?
Code Red?
Yeah. It was a study done in Hamilton, and it looked at the social determinants of health, and then it looked at census data and life expectancy and hospital data. And it just compared health outcomes across the city, and it found a 21-year life expectancy difference between downtown Hamilton and the wealthier areas in Hamilton. I have a map of it here. So the green areas are all the rural areas, and they're pretty healthy. And I live in the green area in the north. And the biggest determinant of health that I found was income, but it's also facing problems with affordability and that sort of thing. Since my dad bought his property, the housing values have almost gone up by 5 times. So it's a bit of a struggle there. So there's issues with coping and that sort of thing. But overall, I did find it to be fairly healthy. And the study kind of proved that.
In the area of Flamborough, I know there's the little village of Flamborough, right? But then there's the large rural area that's referred to historically, at least as Flamborough. So are you focusing on the village area, or?
I just focused on the whole area. Like, I wasn't focusing on Waterdown, which is like the town area that you were probably thinking of.
Yeah.
I just focused on the rural area.
Okay.
And then one of my findings was that it was healthy for a rural area, but it wouldn't be healthy for like people without cars. So I said that the rural demographic has a car to drive into town, and town's not far away. Yeah. It's only 5-10 minutes. So I said it's pretty healthy for a rural population.
It's really useful to bring that lens you have to the scattered rural population. I had a student some years ago, and she was looking at access for employment in a family situation in Northern Ontario, and particularly based on many families only being able to afford a single vehicle, and traditionally that would be the male that would use the vehicle to get to employment, and then for a second for the partner living in the country, to not having a vehicle, then all of a sudden you don't have access to employment, you're isolated. And if you wanted to pursue employment, you really can't, like if you're looking for minimum wage at Tim Hortons, something you really can't afford a second vehicle in order to do that. So it's really interesting to start thinking about rural in the absence of public transit that's almost always not there, right? And what that can mean in a family context. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Just a quick question, just like a general question. For like property taxes, like your dad's property's increased value of five times. Does that mean like your property taxes go up 5 times? Like, is it based off property value?
It's based on the total value in the municipality. So if everybody's property taxes go up, right, then your taxes probably don't, because it's based on the revenue that the municipality requires in order to drive the operations of the municipality. Where it becomes a real problem, for example, is along the Lake Huron shoreline, where cottage values go up disproportionate to the rest of the so if everyone's value is going up, then everybody's taxes probably stay pretty similar. But if one area of a municipality goes up, such as the lake shore, relative to other areas, then those property values become significantly higher. And we hear issues, for example, at times of seniors that are locked into housing in an area that they could once upon a time afford, but now they can no longer afford the taxes. My answer makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's what I was just kind of wondering, like somebody who has been working the same job for 40 years and not earning anymore, but the property taxes are going up.
Yeah.
Like they can't even afford their own house anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and that can happen.
Another problem in rural areas too is that if this population is stagnant and there's not experiencing growth, services to keep the same operations going go up for the municipality each year. So they have to raise their taxes because they're not getting any new houses to add to their revenue, but they still need to make sure that the water's of the same quality or upgrade their pipes, and that falls to the existing taxpayers. So that makes their property or their taxes in general go up really high. So yeah, that's a problem for small towns that don't grow.
Because I noticed, for example, in the local newspaper up in Huron, I can't remember what it might have been Wingham, but they were sort of quoting 7%. Is that right?
Yeah. So for example, a town that's just near where I live, they're doing every year for the next 5 years, their water and sewer rates are going up 7%, which like is not a significant portion, but it's enough that it is increasing. And if they're already taxed extremely high because their population hasn't grown for 10 years, but they're still paying a lot to keep their roads going, to keep the water. So now that they have to upgrade their services, it's coming as a larger and larger increase. So yeah, that ruffled a lot of feathers.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And we've heard about Perth, so not put anybody on the spot. But.
So I, from Toronto, focused on an area called Bathurst Manor. So it's kind of where Bathurst and Shepherd sort of intersect. And it's very heavily populated with like Eastern European immigrants. So I kind of discussed like coming from my personal experience because my parents immigrated to that area 23 years ago. So I touched upon things like social exclusion, safety nets, stress, but specifically I talked about like the built environment. So there's a park called Earl Bales, which spans about like 127 acres, and it has like playgrounds, sensory gardens, cycling trails, like snowboard center and like ski centers. And I found that for its contribution to health, it's pretty big since a lot of the buildings back on to the park, and the research shows that you don't have to interact with green space to get positive benefits like happiness and like lowering stress levels. Merely just looking at a green space can contribute to those kind of health outcomes as well. And I also looked at something called the Urban Heart at Toronto. So it's an evidence-based standard for measuring the well-being of Toronto's neighborhoods. And in comparison to other neighborhoods like Scarborough, Etobicoke, where there might be more visible minorities, it had better walk scores, lower mortality rates, and that was also linked with things like diabetes and obesity as well. So it was kind of interesting to see how when one social determinant of health was lower or higher, it also connected with another social determinant of health. So it was interesting to see how they connected with one another.
And if I think of the context in Toronto, what would you say from what you've heard from folks that have been talking about some of the smaller communities? So any key observations in terms of key? I mean, the size and scale is so different.
Yeah. And I guess also because when you have such a city, you can focus on more things, I guess. Whereas I heard a lot of people talk about sort of communities and like services. In a city, you don't have that like community feel. So you kind of start looking at other things like, I don't know, like green space and things that might be more scarce, I guess you could say. So someone in a rural community might not focus on green space as much as someone in a city where it's not that widespread.
That's true. Although it is interesting, sometimes we perceive certain things to exist in rural communities in abundance, which aren't necessarily there, because that little village or community of Dungannon I mentioned earlier, like there's, I mean, it's surrounded by rural, but there's no public. I don't think there's virtually nothing that you'd want to go to.
Dungannon.
I know, for Dungannon. It's sad, isn't it? Anyway.
But there is nothing.
What there is nothing.
I mean, and it's not to pick on Dungannon, because there are hundreds of little villages out there that are similar in a sense. So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Shannon?
Yes, I'll try to be quick because we've heard about a lot of places. I focused on Guelph, specifically the neighborhood where I live this year, which is kind of like the old university area. And that's a community that I'm not necessarily as steeped in as many of you who talked about your hometowns. I've only lived there for about 5 months. So it was kind of just like my first impressions and things I've noticed in the time that I've been there. And what was interesting that I noticed is that a lot of the things that I liked and disliked, or that I dislike and like about living in that area, are really closely tied to, I think, the health of the community. So for example, it's super walkable, which is awesome. I used to live in a different area of Guelph, and I had to bus everywhere, versus now I can walk downtown, I can walk to the university, there's restaurants, there's shops, there's lots to do, which is really great. There's green space, there's the Speed River Trail right nearby, which is awesome. So those are things that I really like about living in the old university neighborhood, and things that I think really contribute to the health of the community. But on the other hand, I don't think it's as healthy for people who are lower income. And so even something as simple, one of my gripes about the community is that there's no really accessible grocery store nearby. There's one sort of natural food market that is fine if you want to pay $6 for a carton of milk, but it's not super accessible.
It's the same place, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Downtown, right?
Yeah. So that's an issue. It's difficult to get to other grocery stores. Even if you take the bus, that's really the only option, and it's not super convenient. So even anecdotally, I know that like I'll often just opt for fast food if I haven't had time to go to the grocery store rather than take the trek all the way to another end of Guelph. Additionally, another issue I think is affordable housing, and that is an issue particularly in the downtown area of Guelph. It's kind of interesting because there's a mix of like $1 million homes in the area and then ones that have presumably been owned for longer that are sort of run down nowadays. But I also know from my experience that rent tends to be higher in that end of Guelph, even if you're just renting. So that's an issue. I think there are a couple things. Overall, I much prefer that end of Guelph to where I used to live, but I think that there are a couple issues, particularly if you're in a lower income group.
There's a couple of things that struck me about what you were saying. But the first was that you've been here for 5 months. So it's that sort of that first impression and how important that is for communities to be thinking about that, because it's really easy to live in a community and just not see it with fresh eyes. So there are programs out there actually where municipalities will exchange with another community. You bring people in and give them their first impression, because that first impression may or may not be as accurate in some ways as someone that's lived there a long time, but it still is the first impression, right? It's that, that street corner that has ugly buildings around it people have seen forever but don't think anything about them. So it's really valuable to reflect on that. Any questions?
I think it's interesting, like your point about the grocery stores in Guelph. I live down west of, or east, sorry, of Victoria, down Grange, down Watson Parkway. And like it's, for my house, it's basically like a 15-minute drive to a grocery store. Like that was something that blew me away. Like it's 15 minutes to a grocery store. Like back home, I live in the middle of nowhere, and like literally on a farm, 15 minutes out of town, I can still get to a grocery store faster than I can. I live right in the city. It's really strange. And like you can get on the bus, you have to transfer, and you have to carry your groceries. So like I have a car, which I'm lucky about that. But like if you didn't have a car, like it's tough.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I don't have a car, and actually like my boyfriend comes like every weekend just to take me grocery shopping because I need to take like 3 buses to get, and I live on College and Highway 6. So the grocery store that I want, like I don't want to go to like No Frills, for example. Sometimes I want to go to Zehrs or where there's like more options. And like I went once grocery shopping and the bags like ripped. And it was like awful. So ever since then, I either do Good Food, which like delivers food to my door, like the ingredients, and I just cook at home, or I just get a ride. Yeah.
And you think of folks here, for the most part, yes, students, but still have certain means. And if you think of people that are in more difficult economic circumstances, right, you just come away with appreciation. I know there's a woman a professor at the University of Buffalo, Samina Raja, does really interesting work around food deserts and so on. And I've taken students to meet with her at times in the past, talking about, this is in downtown Buffalo, and folks who have really low incomes, complete absence of grocery stores, and what people do their shopping in variety stores. Well, if you're buying your groceries in variety stores, the kinds of things you're buying, right? You're just not getting anything of high nutritional value. I mean, you might find something, but you're not buying those things, right? Yes. So, thanks for the question and thanks for the comments. And which one you look again? It was
Oak Ridges.
Oak Ridges, right? I knew you had talked earlier as well about.
I talk fast.
That's good. That's good. So we have 3 or 4 folks online that we haven't heard from. So I'm just going to look at the top left on the screen. Laura, do you want to jump in with some comments on your community?
Sure. So I did terracotta, which ended up being quite a challenge because you actually can't even find a population number for terracotta.
Do you mind letting us see you, just touching the video button?
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So there's no StatsCan data on terracotta. You have to go to the town of Caledon, and that's quite a larger area. And our signs don't even have a population. So that made it challenging. I, going into this, expected my community to come out as a healthy one because of our proximity to green space, and it's how it works well with my lifestyle. So from my property, we can walk to the Bruce Trail. We're right on the Greenbelt cycling route. Terracotta conservation areas across the street. You can get through the Bruce Trail to Silver Creek conservation area. So lots of green space. And the Credit River is one of the better cold water fisheries in the southern area of the province. So in that way, it's very healthy. But then when I started to look through more of the social determinants, it got more interesting. So the income is high in Terracotta because housing prices are high. Georgetown housing prices, which is our closest town, is about $1 million. So the income has to be high to afford the houses, except for there's not a lot of career opportunities. So most of this income comes from people commuting to Toronto, which was interesting. So kind of what it came down to, and everything we have to drive to. In town, there's one restaurant, Terracotta Inn, and there's a seasonal general store. Otherwise, it's a 10-minute drive to Georgetown, which has all the amenities of a city, which is great. It has a go train to Toronto, which is also great, but that is a 10-minute drive to Georgetown. So what I kind of got out of this is that, your ability to determine health really depends on your demographic of that community as well. But also to really understand the health of the community, I'd have to look at people within the community that work close to the community and the commuters and understand the impacts that commuting has on the health of the community, just because it seems to be such a big component to the characteristics of the town. So, yeah.
Cool, thank you. Any questions for Laura? I mean, the one comment you made that intrigued me is this notion of people that commute into the community with high incomes, and people that might have traditionally been there without such high incomes, and the challenges that can create in a whole bunch of different kinds of ways, from affordability of homes to so on. And we've heard other people talk about that in a certain way too. So anything that would trigger in terms of your comments, Laura?
That's why I was kind of thinking that it needs to be assessed through looking at the people that work within the community and the people that commute, so you can understand like the impacts of commuting and on the health of the community and the perceptions of health to the two groups, because I think it's two very isolated groups for sure, and it can't really be looked at as a whole. But we also don't have a school. Like, we really don't have anything in town, and it's just stuff that you don't really consider if you're not using those amenities. So when I moved there in university, or when I finished high school, it didn't matter that school wasn't closed. Like, small things like that weren't important, so I didn't really consider them when I, would tell people Terracotta is a great place to live. But to get my mail, I have to go to the P.O. box in town, which I have to drive to get the mail slip, which I then have to drive to Georgetown to pick up my package. We don't have garbage pickup. We have to go to a dump. So it's different.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, thank you for those comments. Hannah, would you be willing to jump in there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I decided to focus on my hometown of Grand Valley. It's located in Dufferin County, just alongside the border with Wellington County, so kind of in between the Orangeville and Guelph area. And the biggest thing I noticed about my community is that there's a real lack of employment. So most of the employers or businesses in town are more service-based, a lot of restaurants, small stores, and there's not really any big employers aside from one aggregate operator. And otherwise, a lot of people work on farms or family farms. So I think that's something that's really a challenge for Grand Valley, is attracting employers to the area and what types of employers you want to attract, because Grand Valley is predominantly a commuter community with a lot of people that travel either to Guelph for work, or we're about 50 minutes from Brampton, so they travel to there. So it would be difficult to hire an employer that maybe was more of a manufacturing-based employer that would generally pay lower wages, and if those types of people can't afford housing in the community, it's difficult to find labor. And I do know, it's not necessarily the community I looked at for my project, but I do know in Listowel, because I work in that area, that this is a significant problem for them. A lot of the employers in Listowel actually bus in employers from nearby Kitchener because their employees can't afford to live in Listowel, and the residents in Listowel are people of higher income who commute into Kitchener. They can't afford the big homes in Kitchener, but they can afford a similar size home in Listowel. So that's a real challenge, is matching the population that lives in the actual community with the people that want to work there. And similarly, Grand Valley, I think another thing that they have that makes them unhealthy is a real lack of choice in housing. Most housing is single detached homes. Some newer developments have introduced townhouses. However, as part of this project, I took a look at the market value for those, and they're about $450,000. For someone to live there, they would probably need to commute pretty far to get a job to afford that. So that was my biggest takeaway from the assignment.
Interesting little community, Grand Valley. How many folks have been to Grand Valley? Yeah, it's kind of a neat little spot. Any questions? Okay, well, thanks very much then, Hannah. And Simran?
Yeah, so I did the area that I live in here in Mississauga. I said that in terms of walkability and accessibility, it's pretty good. Within a 10-minute walk, there's 2 different grocery stores, there's 3 different medical clinics, there's like massage therapy, there's a lot within walking distance. There's also schools within walking distance. So in terms of that, it's good. But at the same time, it's a very developed area and very densely populated. So I think when you're looking for just a place to de-stress or go for a walk that's not as populated or not as noisy, that's difficult to do here because where I live, it's very close to the entrance to the 407. It's also on an airport route, so there's actually signs in the area that say air traffic noise warning. And like every few minutes, you'll hear planes flying by. So there's not a lot of green space or natural areas nearby. So I think in that sense, it's not as healthy, but in terms of services and accessibility, I found it to be pretty good.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch right at the outset. Was it Mississauga, did you say?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Cool. Any questions for Mississauga, Brady?
I've seen those signs before where it's like, it says like airplane area or whatever. What's the point of those signs? I just don't really understand what the reasoning.
So what is
what do the signs say?
They say, I think it says something about air traffic noise warning. I assume that it was there because when we first moved here, it was like 20 years ago and it was a newly developed area. So I don't know if it was a warning for people that were actually looking to buy a house here, because I'm not sure why else they would put it here.
Yeah, it was just interesting to me. It was I've never seen a sign like that before.
Yeah, I've seen the sign, but I would think it's about warning people so that and there's you're probably familiar with restrictive covenants. It can end up in deeds. So I wouldn't be surprised if the deeds of the property have restricted covenants on them that say something to the effect of warning people that they're under the flight path of airlines. Like I could see that being insisted upon by the airport as new developments come along, so that you at least have a moral argument when someone tries to challenge things legally and whatever, that, well, you knew this when you bought the property. I suspect there's some of that thinking going on as part of it.
Brady, you're in law, yeah?
Yeah.
So the outline we have to write for that law paper, it's about, a lot of it has to do with housing built here in the Toronto area.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So there are like housing policies specifically about, we have to stop referrals, so like, this is probably very much connected.
Okay, cool. So is my answer close to being correct, Vanessa?
No, I think it's correct, but like if you want an example of like how I can affect the case.
And you see those kinds of things come up elsewhere too, or rail lines, things of that nature too. That we, the question is, how do you make people aware of things, right? And because you buy in that situation, and you have an airport and airlines and flight paths, and yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. I think that we've heard from everyone, but Silva, would you like to go?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yeah, and do you want to click on the button so we can actually see you as well?
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So my paper was based on the Canadian facts, and I did use Alliston, where I live right now, as the kind of study community, which was actually very interesting to me. Along with everything that is like housing affordability, employment, all of these, or like walkability, green space, and everything. It's pretty much very healthy community, but I don't remember, like, maybe not everybody touched on the social services. I don't know if you know anything about social services in your community, but here in Alliston, it's actually pretty significant what these non-for-profit kind of like establishment do for the community. And I actually sit on a board of one of them, which is called Contact South Simcoe. And they mainly work with women that are abused, and to provide employment and housing for them if they're having any issues with, like they want to leave the house but they're not safe in it and things like that. And other than that, there is like also a lot of actual health services. It's a small kind of like, it's hybrid between urban and rural, but you will see it's kind of small, but you will see like we have a hospital, we have a full lab here. You can do like blood work, everything, like x-rays and everything. We have 2 movie theaters. We have about 5 schools. And it was like, to me, it was very interesting. Like, I would live here, but I didn't really like think about it that way. A lot of trails, and of course with Boyne River going throughout the town, a lot of opportunities to fish, to swim, although we're not supposed to, but I see a lot of kids going there, especially in summertime. What else? The only one thing that is really, to me, it's an issue, and I see it a lot, is the connection to transit. So there is no transit here. And if you want to go, for instance, if I want to go to Toronto, so my option will be either driving all the way there or going 30 minutes to Barrie to take the GO train, or going about 35 minutes to Bradford to take the GO train. But other than that, I believe everything is close by you. Like I personally walk to grocery store, and I can walk to, like have a lot of restaurant, a lot of options, like different options for restaurants here. Even the other thing that I found, it was very interesting, the population itself, like you would see, it came to 49 female to 51 male, actual, like in the actual demographics here. A lot of young people also, and somewhat there are some, like more seniors, but in general it's just a young population. But it was actually, Alliston was taken out of the list of most affordable places to live in Ontario, just I think in 2017, because the homes used to be like the home prices used to be between 200 to 350, but right now you cannot find that anymore here. It's basically starting from 500 upwards. The other thing here is a big chunk of this community, or of Alliston, is actually zoned, I think, I'm not sure what they call it. It's see something. It's basically just like where the Honda. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Honda manufacturer here. It's just like half of Alliston is that manufacturer. And the thing is, it's surrounded by conservation area, which is, to me, the way I see it, it's true that it brings a lot of economic opportunities, but also it would be really nice if like we can access housing there. But again, I think it's just the way it's zoned and it's there anyways, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So
Thank you for those. Sorry.
yeah, and there are like, although there is a lot of not a lot, but like there is fairly enough supply of affordable housing, like government housing. It's actually, there's another building that is coming in 2021 that will provide 20 extra units for affordable housing here in Alliston downtown.
Thanks. Well, certainly lots of things happening in Alliston, and again, another community a little bit like Orangeville that's evolving fairly quickly and feeling the influence of the GTA as that impact spreads out a bit. Any questions related to Alliston? Okay, well, I'm going to suggest, so we're going to move into how walkable your community is, but I'm not proposing that we hear from everyone because I know it's in progress. So how many people have actually done the walkability portion where they've gone out and walked the community and try to get a sense of where it's at? So we've had a few people have done that. So I'm just saying if we hear from three or four people quickly in terms of what your impression was, what you've done that might help other people that have yet to do that in terms of their process, what really worked well for you, and so on. So anybody want to volunteer just to share a little bit about your process that you've gone through in terms of walkability? Yeah.
So I went to Fergus and we drove there. My initial plan was to walk because obviously for walkability you'd want to walk, but the weather was like really bad, so I was taking pictures out of a car. But it made me think about how much weather impacts walkability and how it changes based on of season. So for one example was it was like a sidewalk and then there were stairs going up and it says closed for the stairs said closed for winter maintenance, use sidewalk, and the sidewalk was completely covered in snow and there was no sidewalk on the other side. So that was like one example that I didn't like. So it just made me think of, or for example, like streets, if there's potholes, once the ice melts, it's just like a huge puddle. So into that perspective, it made me think more about how much living in a cold climate can affect people's walkability.
Absolutely. As you mentioned that last year, one of the MPH students was actually based in Kenora, and her walkability, like the snow was like, through the roof almost.
Yeah.
And she was out trying to navigate that. And I think she had maybe a child with her as well, but it was all the challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember myself, as you mentioned that, this was on the north end of Guelph, and this would be 4 or 5 years ago. There was a person who had a little electric scooter, like not a scooter, but it's not a wheelchair, but akin to that. And he was stuck in the snow. Just again, it's the same kind of challenge that people might face. So thanks for that. Again, it's this notion of reflecting on that. And I appreciate the weather might have been yucky. If you get out, then you really do experience it, though.
Yes,
in a
absolutely.
different light yet again. So does anybody else want to share a little bit of your initial observations?
So me and Laura did a walkability audit for Elora. We had a class in Elora.
Oh, yeah.
For our advanced plan course, so we figured we'd just do it there. We found Elora is pretty walkable as it is it's a tourist location, so the downtown core is pretty walkable. I guess the faults that we found for the most part was that they're active down transportation, so cycling within the downtown area, it's really non-existent, although they have lots of bike racks and stuff, but there's no marked cycling paths within the town. I know there's trails within the area, but I was looking at a plan, and Laura I think was looking at as well, the people were just talking about this transportation plan they were putting forward, and there are a lot of comments being like, people in Elora drive to work that work in Elora when if there's an option to bike or easily walk, there should be. We also found
would any place in Elora be more than 10 or 15 minutes by walking to anywhere else in Elora?
Yeah, it went bad. But the other thing we noticed is that the walkability is great in the downtown, but that pedestrian bridge we went on, you walk right across the side of that pedestrian bridge, there's no sidewalks. It's it's very weird, because I guess they're really focusing on that downtown because that's where people are going. So it's very much yes, you're creating that ability for people to move from the downtown core to the outside of the town or vice versa, but there's no resources on the outside of town. So you're really focusing the growth in the downtown and not improving the other areas and also making those spaces really accessible as well. So overall, Laura's doing great, but I think in time they'll have to
So any best practices for other folks doing the assignment? You haven't done that piece yet?
Work with someone.
Yeah.
Like go to your town. Like you can do a little shop. You can like get a coffee, have a good time. And make sure it's a good day. Wear good shoes. Oh my gosh, I wear shoes with holes in them and my feet get really wet, so I don't recommend that. But yeah, it's pretty good.
If I remember last year, I think the most interesting projects, at least, so I won't use the word best, but most where people had worked with someone else, because that leads to like you get that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and have a bit. I don't know if you did this or not, but it struck me that they didn't just wander. They had a bit of a planned route, if I could put it that way, so that you said, okay, I'm wanting to get from here to there, as opposed to just going for a stroll. And I think it.
Yeah, so we kind of started off as like a little bit of a leisurely stroll, but like Alora's so small, so we knew we were gonna go up the main drag and come back.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna go to a bigger place, definitely have a game plan.
But eyes open for things like crosswalks and signage and barriers and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like even railings, like where are railings located? Like I think it's the post office, possibly the library in Elora, and they have a railing that goes down the middle of the stairs and it like sticks out into like part of the sidewalk. And like you wouldn't notice that just being a person that's like privileged enough to be able to, walk and like function like normally. But if you're someone in a wheelchair, like stroller or something, like that's not great.
Yeah.
So keep your eye out for those like random things you would in particular.
But I asked for things that I was sort of scoring the running route. So I use my running route as like a 5K loop that goes to the downtown and like through some residential neighborhoods. And so I use that as like a walkable, I don't know, like sort of proximity for general scoring and hit some nice areas. And then like it was also snowy. It was right after that big dump. So yeah. I would say just highlight some things before you go because it was cold. And my phone froze near the end. So I was glad I had like an idea of what I was looking for to begin with.
I don't know if it's suggested in the assignment, and not that people necessarily need to do this, but it's also interesting to try to think of different age groups. Right? So if you're doing the walkability as as a fit young person.
Yeah, going for a run.
Yeah. As opposed to what would it mean if you're 85 and doing it, or conversely.